This is our 317th meeting since we started in February of 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require our speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We have to know ahead of time what we're going to talk about. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, remind the interrupter. We listen only one fool at a time. That's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speakers, are there any announcements? Now's the time for announcements. Anybody has announcements? Now's the time to do it. Anyone have an announcement?
Anybody new here?
Anybody new here? There's one guy, he's from England. I know. You've been here before? All right.
18 months ago.
18 months ago he was here. All right.
Well, I don't need you to tell people how we...
All right. Well, no one new here. Everybody's... No, okay. Well, next week, we're going to have Christy Laris. She's going to talk about why activism matters. It's on your itinerary there. I'm not going to read all this. And it should be good. And she's going to talk about community organizing activists, campaign field organizers, discuss the importance of strategic political activists with progressive parties. Anyway, it's on that's next week, so don't forget it. And that's about all I have. So our speaker tonight is Dr. Chris Boldt. He's going to talk on the question of insecure personality markers. He's going to discuss insecure personality markers and strategies for dealing with insecurity and undesirable behaviors. He will show 5 important daily decisions and 4 basic contentions that reveal 34 insecure personality markers. Chris will demonstrate and argue that we are the primary catalyst in terms of the quality of our own interpersonal relations. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Dr. Chris Boldt. It's all yours.
Thank you. Everyone can hear me okay? You know, Tom here, he looks like such a nice guy. And frankly, my interaction with him didn't start off that way. He played a dirty trick on me very first time I ran into him. At the very time that he invited me to come and speak, he took my picture. And here it is.
Oh my.
Now isn't that a dirty trick?
You're icky twerp.
You know, I'm not going to cover physiological markers tonight, but this photograph is a good example. Do you remember that guy used to be on TV years ago here?
Channel 11, sure.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah, but anyway, there are 3 physiological markers that he had here. One is how wide his eyes are. Another one is the way his mouth is shaped. And another one is the way he's holding his hands. When I saw that, I said, this is just something I can't resist using with this talk. So, now that you know how corny I am, we'll pick up and go from there. I originally ran into these daily choices, and there were 4, and I've run into 2 more since that time. But psychologically, they are really excellent things to consider in terms of starting off your day. And it can make the difference between a very uplifting day and one that's rather depressing. The first thing that you should do is to focus on solutions, not problems during your day. Be thinking about the solutions. Don't be letting yourself get depressed about the problems. Work on the emotion of love and not fear. Try to have the attitude of optimism rather than pessimism. Try to work with the motivation of inspiration and not desperation. Try to have a self-image of abundance or lack. And you know, I'm 76, and that's real easy for me to do. Because you know, what I had as a young man growing up, when I was about 9 years old, we all were happy with and thought it was middle class. Today, it would be poverty. And what we saw as wealth in that day, everybody in the average neighborhood has conveniences the wealthy didn't have. And what I think about in my own case, we had what we considered wealthy man on my block. He owned a machinist shop, and he had a Cadillac. But you know, that was before air conditioning. He didn't have an air-conditioned house. He didn't have an air-conditioned car. He didn't have signal lights. We were sticking our arms out the window. On and on. And he didn't have insulation in the house. And at that time, we considered him a wealthy guy. And now, what we consider poverty has conveniences that he can't touch. In fact, people were lucky at that time, and many of you know, to have a 3-person party line telephone. And you'd hear people yell out the windows to other houses, "Get off the damn phone." So anyway, we've worked our way through that, but I love, as I say, somebody else started this off with the first 4, and I just think that I probably ought to put this in my bedroom and look at it every morning when I first wake up. It really looks like good advice to me. Now, I'm going to have about 5 contentions about insecure personality markers. They're things that I believe to be true. So if there's anything you don't like about this talk, I'm your target. It was my idea. Although many of them are common sense. Only the secure people can be humble of their own volition. You know, humility is something we always admire in everybody. But you know what? Humility takes a little bit of self-confidence. My second contention is that all undesirable behaviors which are not symptoms of damaged brain physiology are rooted in insecurity, as secure individuals have neither the time nor inclination to be anything but nice and considerate of others. I believe that with all my heart. The third contention is that most people have one or more sources, known or unknown to others, of insecurity. All got something we're not totally comfortable with. Of course, the present company accepted. But and these are things we have to work our way through. The fourth contention is that secure and psychologically healthy individuals feel perfectly comfortable complimenting and building up others, and they're also smart enough to understand that the longer term mutual benefits of such behaviors for everybody involved. And the fifth and final one, I contend that all egocentric behavior is rooted in insecurity. In other words, if somebody's trying to come off and project themselves a certain way, it's because they're not comfortable with the insights other people have of them, and they're working on it. So I'd say that undermines the commonly held conclusion. You know, you'll hear people say, boy, he sure thinks a lot of himself. And whenever I hear that, I think, well, probably just the opposite is true. Here's a rationale as to why I think it's worthwhile to be aware of insecurity markers. It aids one in understanding the undesirable behavior of others and helps to promote healthier reactions to such behaviors. For example, second-party reactions such as empathy or other strategies which enable one to give relief to the insecure party. So that's my rationale for thinking that paying attention to these is worthwhile.
Sub with fries? Bring it around here, let me see it. Yeah, that's me, I think. All sub with fries, yeah.
You know, I'm kind of moving around here.
You must be lower.
Yeah, it's too loud, probably.
Yeah. Or the other. Well, I make it loud enough everybody can hear it.
I taught in college for a long time, and quite often I had 60 in a class, and every now and then they'd put me in a small class, and the students would be asking me to hold it down a little bit. So if that happens here, don't hesitate. It's nothing new. Now I want to go into some of what is perceived as characteristics of insecure personalities. I contend that most insecure personalities are quite often self-centered and not other-centered. In other words, they've got an over-preoccupation with themselves. You know, you don't see many people that are spending their time being concerned about others, being insecure about themselves because they're not thinking about themselves. I contend that quite often they're lacking in humility. And as I said a little earlier, humility, I contend, requires self-confidence. At the end, I'm going to give a wonderful example of all of this.
Well, of course.
Insecure personalities also are often so preoccupied with self-respect that it mitigates the propensity for others to be complimentary or helpful to them. It's counterproductive for them. A lot of times people would try to help them, and as a result of the way they react, they don't get the help. Quite often, they're hesitant to acknowledge that they did not know information shared by another for fear of self-contrast with their own self-knowledge. You know, quite often they'll say, you know, they hadn't heard it before, and they'll say, yeah, I heard that once before. Another thing they often are, they're holding one or more personal secrets or weaknesses they feel uncomfortable in sharing. I'm pushing the wrong button. I contend they're often not good listeners, and often when a subject is brought up, they turn out to be so insecure about someone knowing something that they are not familiar with that they are sometimes quick to imply they already know everything about it, and quite often miss out on important new learning and insights about the topic. I've got a good friend. He was in an important business position for many years, and nicest guy you ever hope to run into. But oh Lord, he has real difficulty admitting that he doesn't know everything about something, you know. As a result of their poor listening skills, quite often they're unable to make good supervisory personnel. That's an important component of supervision. They also are often of being incapable to experience truly thoroughgoing intimate relationships. It's really good when two people have a relationship if they can open up with each other openly and honestly and confidently. So they're quite often naive in terms of interpersonal relations, and the over preoccupation with their self precludes insights concerning others because they're not thinking of others, they're thinking about themselves. Quite often they're pessimistic in nature, especially concerning others. Quite often they're experiencing tendencies to be isolationist in one or more formats. They just kind of will tend to want to stay to themselves more than they would ordinarily. They're also quite often unable to be out front about themselves in terms of discussing personal weaknesses. And that's real therapy, to be able to say, boy, man, I never could do this, or I never could do that. That's good self-therapy, and they don't have access to that usually. Also, they're quite often unable to speak out strongly and confidently for positions in groups of any size. And somewhat parallel to that, they're likewise unable to speak out strongly and confidently in front of groups of unfamiliar strangers. Quite often they're hesitant to be complimentary of others, even close friends, for fear of contrast with self. I say they're also quite often negative concerning the accomplishment of peers, and that's frequently motivated by standing amongst peers. They're quick to insert downers quite often, with acquaintances experiencing a modicum or more of success. Somebody achieves something really good, they don't really feel comfortable saying, hey, you did great. You know, they'll, well, what about this or that, you know? And that's just simply an interpersonal equalizing strategy they feel they need to use. I say they often are incapable of building up others because everyone else is a competitive threat, which is another way to say what we said earlier. I say they also are quite often living in fear concerning the self-debilitating personal secrets they're afraid others will discover. And that's sad. And some people have these things and they carry it with them like a load on their back their entire lives. Quite often they're unable to out themselves concerning those personal debilitating secrets. And this is really a weak point, because I consider nothing more powerful than self-deprecating humor. And that's something that they're quite often really, really incapable of. I'll have more to say about that shortly, but that is a real aid in anything you do. Quite often they're experiencing less than optimal physical health due to psychological insecurity. And not only that, but also quite often unable to experience optimal mental health due to that. Can't mentally relax. Quite often they're incapable of competent and uplifting leadership of others. Takes a positive personality. Quite often they're lacking in terms of a sense of purpose that is greater than themselves. And that's something that makes us all better people and happier people and more self-satisfied people, having a purpose that's greater than ourselves. If we're constantly concentrating on our own self-interests, that's really pretty unhealthy. I'd say they also are often too insecure to open up to others in a manner such that their friends could help them. You know, most people, if they know, hey, gosh, I'm having a problem, people will jump in and try to help them. But if they're acting like, hey, nothing's wrong, they're probably not going to get any help. Quite often they're lacking in terms of a truly other-centered and involved spiritual development, which can be very uplifting every day. I say they're also quick to be critical of others, and that's an interpersonally equalizing strategy. I say furthermore, they're quite often uncomfortable with their own self-image. They don't like what they see in themselves. They're not comfortable with it. And as a result, are experiencing some degree of self-loathing. Very simply, they're just unable to be open and honest about themselves. And that's very relaxing, just to feel like, hey, lay it all out there and let the chips fall where they may. That's a healthy attitude in life. In other words, another way to describe that is just unable to be comfortable in their own skin. And quite often ashamed and secretive about their own personal value system. They'd rather not tell you how they really feel about things or what they believe. And here's one, and it kind of matches up with that earlier one I said about egocentricity. Quite often they're so involved in self-aggrandizement that it mitigates the propensity of others to be complimentary. You know, if they're spending all their time building themselves up, other people are slow to join in. They don't feel like they need to, and probably feel like it's already out of proportion. Basically, it's just over preoccupation with self. Here's one other contention I have, and I think I've known quite a few people. You've heard of people with bipolar disorder. That's having two personalities. Sometimes they might outdo that. But I contend that it's a disorder that causes unusual back and forth shifts in a person's mood, energy, and ability to function. And I would contend that quite often it's merely two phases of insecurity awareness, not necessarily a defective brain physiology. In other words, I've had friends that when they were feeling secure, they could relax and be open and honest with you. And then at other times when they're feeling insecure, they just tighten up and seem to be totally miserable. And they're in such bad shape, you don't feel like you could even help them. Simply stated, unable to be themselves. Now, I say this, strategy for dealing with undesirable behaviors. And this is an attempt to identify the individual's insecurities, and once found, you will have one or both of two healthy responses, either a feeling of pity or a healthy chuckle. But when you know somebody that's has insecurity problems, you know you'd like to help them. And once you know what it is, until you know what the source of their insecurity is, it's pretty difficult to help them with that particular area. But once you know it, then there's a possibility that you could help them to deal with that undesirable behavior. Man, I've got to go back here. Let me make sure that I've gone back far enough. Well, that's... Here is one of my favorite quotes. And this was a little lady in the church I go to, came and talked to a class. And she really was kind of a lighthearted, fun type person, you know. But she came up with a quote that, as far as I'm concerned, is unrivaled in terms of what it has to say. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And I'm quoting her all the time. And very simply, it points out, it's hard to find what you want in others if you do not bring it yourself. Isn't that wonderful? That's really true. I've got a little bit more to say about that. And I say quite often what we see in others is a mirror reflection of ourselves. We're the catalyst of most of our interpersonal relationships. There's one other, I'm going to have to go back. I missed one. Let me check, if you'll pardon me. I don't think I covered this as the one. This is very important in dealing with these people. This is the most effective strategy that I can think of. And I say humility and self-deprecating humor are aids in diffusing the insecurities of others. These can take these people off the defensive, and quite often they will attempt to outdo you with their own self-deprecating humor. It's the law of attraction. And that's really true. I found that nothing makes, when you're dealing with somebody, nothing will make them melt like just taking yourself real lightly with a little self-deprecating humor. And if you do, it seems to me that no matter which direction you go with people, whether it's egotistical or humble, whatever you do, if there's a competitive factor in there, and they'll try to outdo you. And if you're super nice, they will try to outdo you. You know what? I think of one situation. I had a buddy I taught with in college for years. And he was real tight with money and everything, you know. And we'd go out to eat or something, and I wouldn't pay anything. I'd buy or whatever, you know. And did that over a number of years. And finally, before it was all over, the guy was outdoing me. I mean, giving me some real nice stuff. And like a drafting table one time. And some other things like that. So, I mean, you'll really surprise you. Treating people nice, just like treating them bad. Whichever direction you go in, they're going to try to outdo you. And there's a real nice payoff with that. Here's an example I wanted to present. This was a man that I had more respect for. Oh, did it switch back on me? Excuse me. Let me see. There we go. This is a man, I don't know why I might have hit the table. This was Dr. R. Jan LaCroix.
Oh, yeah.
He got his bachelor's degree from West Point and a PhD degree from the University of Texas at Austin. He was unrivaled in terms of inner security, undergirding the ultimate in humility and purpose. The man ended up being, he was president of Eastville College when I first came there. He had had another position at another college before that. He ended up being vice chancellor of the Dallas County Community College District. Later on, he ended up being the chancellor of Dallas County Community College District. He was president of the Dallas Citizens Council and also chairman of the American Association of Community Colleges. He developed what they called a person-centered college at Eastville when he opened it up. Eastville opened up in 1970. He was the first president. I was very fortunate to be there. I've never seen such an humble yet effective leader in my life. This guy was laid back, cool, and I'd seen him state a principal position when it wasn't to his advantage, when there was a price to pay for doing it. And so I always respected him very highly. Over the years, because I'd been his first math chairman and had been in touch with him over the years, and I'd ended up, he was aware of some of the stuff I did in terms of being in the leadership of some national organizations. He stayed in contact with me, and in the last few years before he died, we'd go out to lunch once a month at some high-class place like Hook, Line, and Sinker. Shrimp. And he was just the nicest guy, most principled and most successful and most loved administrator I've ever known. And he did so much good. But I'll never forget, I was with him the month before he died. He had prostate cancer, and it was going all over his body. And we went out to eat that last night, and I'll never forget. I would go pick him up because he'd gotten where it was difficult for him to drive and what have you. I'd go pick him up, and I picked him up this last night, and as I was taking him home, he said, "Well, Chris," he says, "it looks like I finally found my niche." I said, "What do you mean niche?" And he said, "Well, Nancy and I went to it was the First Presbyterian Church of Dallas. When they opened up, they had developed this wall of receptacles for cremated remains. And he got the very first one. So that's where he said, "I found my niche." So he was just very strong and had a good sense of humor till the day he died. And I'm 76 years old, and I've never seen a leader who I respected more. And I could tell you about some specific situations where he took positions and stands which were not in his favor, but were principled. And he did that with the former chancellor that was chancellor before him, who didn't support him as the chancellor when he came in, but the board knew better. And so he was made the chancellor, and he was that for a number of years, then went to Dallas Citizens Council. And what I have here is just a brief summary of what all he had done. So at any rate, if I ever think of an ultimate example of security, someone who's secure and humble and principled, this guy leads the parade of anybody I've seen in my life. I really was overblown with the respect I had for him. I want to bring, let's see, here's a point I want to make, and here's another point. Our country has had an underlying ordering ideology which has made it to this point, different and superior to the underlying ordering ideologies of some other countries. And it's based upon a philosophy. And here's a contention I make. I was told that the book of Matthew had all of Christ's guidelines for living. And so I went through the book and Matthew, and there were 104 instructions about how to live your life. And my point is this: if you don't accept Christ's deity, that's fine. But as I go through those 104 guidelines, you'd have great difficulty finding any fault with them, with any of them. They're just simple guidelines for living, and I think they're great aid in the development of a confident personality. It's very simply a virtually selfless philosophy of other-centeredness. I'm going to use a quote from a guy named Eric Butterworth, and he overlooks the deity part of this. If you just look at the guidelines, the philosophy, and think of him as being a philosopher, you come to the conclusion that this is the singularly most influential philosopher in the history of the world. Because Christianity has over 2 billion people. It's, I've heard, like 43% larger than Islam. And I like what Butterworth said. He says his teaching was simple, direct, and practical. All the complexities, the forms, the ceremonies, the ritual, the customs and costumes have been added through the long years of the evolution about the religion about Jesus. Said Jesus did not authorize such things. But the guidelines are all other-centered. And I will say this, I'm an extreme Jeffersonian. You know, Thomas Jefferson did a red letter edition of the Bible. All he put in was the red letter parts. And I call myself extreme because all I did a summary of just nothing but his guidelines for living, which is nothing but his philosophy. And that basically is the philosophy that came up with our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, which that was a new thing in terms of constitutions and governments. So, you know, I just say, well, folks, if you don't accept his deity, okay, but what's wrong with the philosophy? And for me, that was the philosophy that I was presented as a kid. The guidelines worked out pretty good. They were other-centered, mentally healthy for me. And the other thing I point out, there is no verse in the New Testament which instructs Christians to harm non-Christians. There are verses where it instructs Christians to love their enemies. And that's an important distinction that you don't find in all the religions. But as far as I'm concerned, I just accept it as a philosophy. And there's a verse in the New Testament that says, hey, anybody that accepts it philosophically is considered righteous, even in the New Testament. They're a law unto themselves, if they never heard of the New Testament. So there are a lot of decent people. And then if you go back to prior to the time Christ was around, Confucius said basically the same thing. Rather than say, treat others like you want to be treated, he said, don't treat others like you don't want to be treated. So it's a simple philosophy, but I think that the one thing that has kept me from experiencing a lot of insecurity in my life was having this as an underlying ordering ideology, and knowing the people around me had that as an underlying ordering ideology, which meant that we were all going to try to treat each other pretty decently. And, you know, a lot of people disagree with me about this, but the reason for being good and doing what's right ought to be something that doesn't deal with a reward, like an afterlife reward. We ought to, I just don't think that if there is a deity that's going to judge us, that he would be so stupid to think that we were righteous just because we were responding to a reward system like a Pavlovian dog, you know. But I speak from my own narrow-mindedness. But at any rate, folks, hey, I appreciate you putting up with me. A few ideas now. You can take shots at me because I'm basically responsible for all of this. So I'm the guy that you need to hit.
Microphone's right there.
I'm gonna.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes,
for you.
sir. I'm gonna shut this down and I'll be right with you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I would say one of my impressions during most of your presentation there, now, if you stand over there, you'll be on video.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay. Most of your presentation, until you got near the end, I was running into this normalcy bias type issue here, which psychology suffers from, has suffered from, where if you are outside the norm, then you're abnormal.
Mhm.
And so, how would you characterize that situation? Yes, no? Talk to me about it.
Well, I haven't thought of what was normal or abnormal, but I have thought what is happy and what's miserable. And if it's something that makes you happy, I'm for that. If it's something that makes you miserable, I'm not for that. And let me tell you this, a lot of the things I listed as insecure, I've probably, the big majority at some point in my life, had a little bit of that myself, if not more.
Well, I was wondering if that was a personal track record there.
Well, if it, to a great extent, I'm sure it was. You know, I'm 76. I've gone through went through basic training when I was 17. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, we have witnessed Donald Trump at all kinds of expositions of positions. How would you characterize his insecurities?
I was thinking that the whole time.
Boy, you know, that's, I would say not as great as those he was running against, because he puts himself out on the line and asks for it time and time again and speaks off the cuff. And I'll tell you the things that have kept him in the ball game is that people feel better with him concerning dealing with ISIS, concerning dealing with the border. I was raised in San Antonio. And concerning, did I say the national debt, they have confidence on that. And then the other thing is dealing with international relations, because other countries, all the deals we make with them, you know, we've just felt like we could give away the ship, not worry about it. I mentioned to the gentleman over there a little earlier before you all came that we are so generous with other nations, and the fact is, if you look at our national debt and factor the average national debt, per capita national debt, in with the average net worth, we're giving to people whose per capita net worth is greater than our own, and the only reason we can do it is because we got a good charge account.
How would you say that Donald Trump fits with, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect.
Oh God, I don't know. You know what, I'll tell you. You know what is so weird about the whole thing is he's gotten all that free, the media, who usually everybody's cussing, they've just given him a Christmas present every day. Yes, sir.
It's ratings. Ratings
Yeah.
are money.
Brilliant analysis. Have you analyzed Hillary Clinton's insecurities?
Well, this is a toughie. This is a toughie. You know what? Her husband was, whether you know, like all human beings, they all had their faults, but he ended up being very loved, you know, and it really did an outstanding job of working with the Congress and got us out of debt. And so, you know, she's can ride on that to a great extent, but I have a hard time coming to a conclusion about her. You know, the one thing that struck me was when somebody asked what she did as Secretary of State, and nobody was saying much. So.
That was on.
Well, I'm coming back to the issues, since no one else had a question for a moment there. I know when I was in the 4th grade, 2 6th grade girls approached me and they said, "We will beat you up if you don't stop using big words. You're making all the children in the neighborhood feel insecure with your big words." So, Professor, what I did is I said supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and I ran like hell.
I love it.
Now, is that socially unacceptable behavior? I'm quizzing you again on that.
It's use of humor.
All right, if it if it made them happy, that's great, and I'd have to think they did get a laugh out of that. Did you have something you wanted to say,
Oh, I forgot.
Tom? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Oh, back there.
Oh, you never, or can you hear me? Oh.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
never use the word selfishness or jealousy or well, you did use self-centered.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And I've been there myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. She had something.
Okay. This Trump thing, it's one thing, it's another, it's the positives, the negatives, and all. Okay, so you were talking from the viewpoint, the positives of Trump, you know, some of the things that we see that might be different internationally or whatever. But since you have all this psychological thinking through that you've done, I mean, his psyche is so everywhere, and
His
it's
what?
very psychological makeup of Trump
Yeah.
is so negative. I think it's so everywhere and unstable, and it's just very frightening to think to me when I see that. And I've studied psychology that somebody like him should be president because he really is very unpredictable and alienating and divisive and all these bad types of behaviors. So how do you reconcile that, especially knowing all that you know about trying to be on the good side of psychology?
Well, one of the main things that people have crucified him about is what he said about Muslim immigration. I've got a question that Americans are afraid to ask, let alone answer. And here's the question. Should any organization whose code of conduct and defining document instructs its members to harm, for example, ambush, besiege, decapitate, burn to death, slay, close parentheses, be classified as a religion or a terrorist organization? If I started an organization tomorrow with that code of conduct, they'd be putting me in the clinker real fast.
Oh, really?
Oh,
I mean,
if I have an organization that instructs my members to kill non-members, yes.
Well, I think there are plenty of millions of Muslims who would say that they're a peaceful organization, and there might be something that's been hijacked in their religion.
Well, I've read through the entire Quran after 9/11, and I wrote a one-page summary called the Islamic Christian Difference Primer. And since that time, I've done more work on that. I'm also familiar with the Pew poll in 2008 of Muslim Americans, and 80% believe the Quran is the Word of God. 40% believe, of those under 30, believe that suicide bombings of innocent civilians can sometimes be justified, and on and on. There were a lot of answers there. So, yeah, they're like every other group. In fact, let me tell you, there are a lot of Christians guilty of malpractice, but they're not, when they do what they do, it's not authorized by the Bible. But in the case,
the name of the Bible,
what is that?
if it's in
The New
in
Testament.
the name of the Bible, and some of the crazy things that I've read in the Bible, that just
Well,
don't apply,
yeah.
should not apply today.
Well, the New
They have that
Testament.
also.
Yeah, the New Testament is their code of conduct, and there's no instructions for them to harm anybody in that New Testament.
Hey, Jim, we have another question.
Okay.
Are you familiar with, or do you accept the possibility that we are in the beginning phases of the third jihad?
You know, I'm not that familiar with those various portions of it, but so I really couldn't speak to it. But I'd love to hear what you know about the first, second, and third, because I know nothing about the phases.
Well, I'll comment on that when the comments come.
Okay, you got 5 minutes. Everybody has 5 minutes. More as far as I'm concerned, but everybody needs an equal shot.
Dr. Boldt, what does emeritus mean?
What is
Emeritus.
emeritus?
Emeritus.
You did your job without getting any trouble for quite a few years.
What's your take on the human mind being like, some people are considered left brain and some are considered right brain, and that sort of thing, and how that factors into personality disorders? And that?
You know, early on, when I was still teaching, I did run into some information on that, and it appears that women tend to be primarily one hemisphere of the brain, and men primarily in the other hemisphere, right and left. But I right now I can't remember which was which. Yes, sir.
Do you think it is important during our day to stop thinking?
I think every day we probably need a little bit of rest. And you know what I do to completely clear my mind each day? For 30 minutes?
Take a nap.
Oh, it's better than that. I watch Wheel of Fortune. I do it religiously.
There are lots of game shows on now.
Yeah, and it's so positive because I'm there rooting for them to win more money. I feel positive.
What part of the Bible is that in?
The reward, I guess. No, I have no idea.
Anyone else?
My favorite, one of my favorite rap singers has a phrase in one of his songs that says, "Jesus is the most quoted prophet in the Quran," and I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that.
I don't really believe he's the most quoted, but they do. He is mentioned, and he's mentioned simply as a prophet, and but I don't think they're promoting any of his guidelines. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm not sure I understood what you were talking about, bipolar. I've known people that have that, and some very gifted people are bipolar. They're always sort of up I've
Yeah.
never seen them, they said they're never down. So
Yeah.
I think in Europe it's not treated as an illness, is it? Don't they treat it with lithium when the person takes off work and they soak in like a spa of lithium and then it goes away?
Well, some people go into deep depressions, then come out and with tremendously innovative ideas and creative ideas, and can't say I'm an expert in it, but I do know that their personality changes and they're either in one mode or the other. I've seen many people who I would find to be in one mode or the other. And some people I really cared a whole lot for, but, it depends upon what day you ran into them.
Well, in this country, don't you find that they want to give the name of something, make it a disease when it's really not?
Oh, yeah, there's loads of that. Oh, my gosh. I'll tell you what I've got mixed emotions about, and that's PTSD, because I was around after World War II, and I had uncles and cousins that were older than me that fought in World War II, and anybody that went in World War II that came back, you were lucky to get them to even talk about it, and they certainly weren't complaining. But I will say this. Here is why I think there is such a thing, possibly a thing as PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome disease, I believe that's right. Here's the reason I think it's true. Because back at that time, we fought to win wars. Now we send our soldiers out kind of like we're just sacrifices. And let me also tell you this. You know how worried we are about collateral damage with ISIS? And so they embed themselves within the civilians and their families? Let me remind you about something. Prior to World War II, when Truman made the decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he asked General MacArthur, he said, "General, in order for us to win this war and invade Japan, how many casualties would you predict that we would have?"
1 million.
Exactly. MacArthur said we would, amongst our own people, experience 1 million casualties. When he went into and bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was 99% collateral damage, it was all innocent civilians. They ended up, was it 270,000 total? Yeah. Taking 270,000 total. Now let me tell you how that figures out. Let's say that we invaded and we lost 1 million, and if we won, you could expect them to have lost 1 million, okay?
3 or 4.
I'm being very conservative, you're right. But if it was just 1 million of theirs, you know what that would mean? It mean we saved 1 million of his decision saved 1 million of our own lives, and we said 730,000 Japanese lives, and I believe he's right, it would have been a hell of a lot more. So I mean, that was, we had to finish it with collateral damage. Now what were we doing? Every time we roll along and let these guys embed themselves and stay away from going after them, then later on, many of them are wiping out our guys. And I get really, you know what's so bad about this war that was unlike the others? They end up with missing arms and legs. And you see this on TV all the time.
Better than dying.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Well, but it's still horrible, and we're just putting them out like sacrificial lambs. And what I was getting around to saying is that I believe that this approach of using them as sacrificial lambs is the reason that they have these psychological problems with where they were going. They didn't have this idea, hey, we're going to win the war and get it over with and make the world better. They're just sitting there, they're going out on another routine, and may or may not get killed, may or may not get blown up. And what for? We're not trying to win, so it's difficult.
Yes. Most Americans were brought up on the notion of godless capitalism, godless communism. Would you care to comment on the notion of godless capitalism?
Well, I won't claim to be an expert on it, but the only thing I can say is about capitalism is that when people purchase things, they do have freedom of choice, and it's not the decisions aren't made by a government agency, so at least they have freedom of choice. And the other thing is where we have this. If you'll notice, there are countries in the world that don't have it, and they're lucky to have clean water. And boy, we've got some people who made big money over here, and a lot of them stuck their necks on the line. In fact, I know some people that they ended up with big money, but they were dead broke 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And so it's a gamble, and they were creative in doing something, but then there were some others that were crooks. Look at this. Who was this guy that they had all these people?
Madoff.
They put him in jail.
Bernie Madoff?
Madoff, yeah. And that was a perfect name for him, Madoff with all her money. Yes, sir.
Going back one, with the battery, going back one.
Okay, something happened to the speaker.
Battery. Going back one step, when you were talking about the soldiers and the lack of purpose, do you think your theory would apply to groups like nations? For instance, Nazi nation, our nation right now, as far as insecurity markers in nations, with the Chinese, let's talk about the big actors and our country. Maybe you could apply your
about insecurity.
Yeah, to a whole group like that.
Yeah. Well, I think there is. I think there's a lot of insecurity, like you say, and you know what? It comes along at the expense of truth. People are fearful and they won't speak the truth, just like the question that they won't ask. Simple question. Logical.
Well, Professor, do you have any comment on the fact that immediately when we got to question and answers, it got into politics and everyone deflected the actual substance of your talk on insecurities? What does that say about this group here?
Well, I tell you what, it says that they're pretty well aware and concerned about our futures. And you know what? Isn't it a shame? Hey, I'm 76, and I've thought of this many times. Let's say that in an afterlife, we go out into a scenario where we can choose to come back into the world at any time and at any location and with any family. Be born back into the world again at any point in history. You know what? I wouldn't trade mine with what these kids have nowadays, I'll tell you that for sure. I loved what I had. I'd choose the same darn thing. And hey, it wasn't being rich. We're talking about a 2-bedroom house, no insulation, no air conditioning, a 9-year-old car, no automatic choke, no electric windows. I go on and on. It goes back to that idea that what was rich when I was a kid now is called poverty.
That's true. Wow.
Any more questions or done questions?
We're done with questions and answers. You can get to sit down.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Now it's your turn to talk, so who wants to be first? It has to be a first. There we go.
Pretty interesting man.
If you want to speak up here, there's chairs up here also. You come up and you be next.
You come from your background. The main things about you are just usually not found in
Hello, Jan. I'll wait for Jan to finish.
Yep.
Hi. Well, one of the things I was immediately struck by was, again, this idea of it being healthy and emotionally healthy to kind of be a part of the herd. And one of my contentions, and my contention growing up and my experience and everything is the herd is kind of batty itself. And if you are normalizing yourself to what is kind of off psychologically, then that puts you off psychologically, doesn't it? I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. If you have any degree of insight more than is generally held, you're liable to be an outsider. And I mean, there are a number of reasons why it could be healthy to be an outsider, and healthy not to be as socially engaged as everybody. I mean, I don't really get along with the biker beer and girls scene there, with some of the bikers, the way they treat their women. I can't hang around with them. I can't. I mean, I'm going to be in a fight, and somebody's going to end up in jail or in the hospital or something because I can't treat women that way. And that's just one example where I don't fit in with that group. And you just got to walk away. So, well, I mean, not everything is like that, but I mean, there's what you seem to be promoting here is kind of the health of the group at large, and I'm taking issue with that. But really, I think everyone as an individual needs to do their own deep search and find the qualities and values that they wish to live by, and then find out who they resonate with, and then that's your normal, that's your peer group. Those are the people you want to run with, the people you want to hang with. I mean, crazy people like this group here, maybe. Huh? Thank you.
This has everything in it.
This does have everything in it, but it's really healthy also. I like to be with people I disagree with.
That's where you learn.
Call me batty, but I like to have people I disagree with, because then you have some really good dialogues. Thank you.
That's true.
Well, I should have brought a stick because I know I'm going to have to fight Tom, fight him back when he cuts my time off. Concerning being part of the herd that John just mentioned, I just wrote a note about that. A sheep is really happy being part of the herd. He gets fresh grain every day and gets taken care of and goes bad to his owner and this and that and the other, and gets fattened up and gets slaughtered and skinned and roasted. And if you go to the Georgia Guidestones, look it up in Wikipedia and read the first tenet of maintain the earth at a sustainable population, that's a very important word, sustainable population of under 500 million. You'll realize what these people who are at the top, so to speak, have in mind for us. Concerning capitalism, that's not to laugh at, it's true. Concerning capitalism, we started out as a country that embraced free enterprise. And we started passing antitrust laws and so forth to keep the large companies from taking over. Well, they got bigger and bigger, and of course the banking system, criminal as it is, was behind all of that. And now we have capitalism, which is focused on money and power, and they have put all the moms and pops basically out of business. And the middle class is diminishing, and the very rich are getting richer, and more are becoming poor. I do not like the term capitalism at all, because it's out of control. It is total greed and lust for power at this point. We need to go back to our founding fathers' principles of free enterprise. Concerning soldier sacrifices, I'm glad you mentioned that point. I had a friend years ago who was telling me of a friend of his who was in Army, and this hearsay of course, but in Army intelligence during the early 60s, and he told his friend that he was in intelligence. He had enough documentation come across his desk that he knew that it was planned that, not estimated that, but intended that at least 50,000 Americans would die in Vietnam. Killing and keeping on killing is one of their big interests in this world because they are extremely occultist. They're satanic, those people at the top who we think wear royal robes and so forth, or religious robes at the higher levels. Concerning bipolar or manic depressive, when I was in high school, it was right after my older brother had been killed, and I had foreseen it as a 13-year-old kid. Clear as day, I knew it was going to happen. And I was stunned and couldn't do anything to stop it, and woke up the next morning at 6 o'clock in the morning hearing the siren a mile away across the golf course, knowing he was in it, knowing he was gone, knowing our lives were shattered from there. So I entered high school right after this, a few months, in a boarding school in an extreme manic depressive state. And I wasn't fitting in too well with the other kids, so I had to, I had no help. Nobody had even the term at that time that I knew of. So I had to sit and back out of myself and say, okay, now how would John react to this situation? And I would model my behavior mentally after his, because the emotions were out of control. I had to get them subdued. And eventually I began to see that in this manic depressive stage, you would wake up in the morning and have, oh, it's going to be a good day, and you'd get happier and happier and happier, and then it'd get frenetic like that, and boom, you'd fall 1,000 feet under the rocks and be crushed and never want to take another breath of life, of air in your life. That's how extreme it was. And it took time to level it out and hold down the climbs from getting so high and bring up the bottom, and pretty soon I felt like I had a personality again. I'm not sure it's not a combination of a lot of my good friends, but nevertheless it worked for me. Concerning Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there's some principles that I rely on when I analyze stuff. All government agencies lie. And I extend that by saying, and NASA tells the most lies and the biggest lies because they have the most to cover up, and I won't go into that part of it because it's too woo-woo for a lot of people. I met a man who used to live here in Texas until he passed away, who had been a prisoner of war in World War II in a prison in Japan, on the mainland. And of course, like any prisoner, we did the same. They were treated like hell. But after Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they took all the American prisoners and had them go to the cities to help clean up. And those were totally civilian targets. They were not military at all, which to me is totally evil. And he said that, I remember the first statement was that in Nagasaki, 78,000 people were killed. Well, they came out and they amended that to over 100, and they've kept going up a little. He said at least 1 million people in each city were killed, at least. And they were all men, women, and children. That's the good old American government. Concerning the jihads, I've been trying to find this video again. There was a man who had studied Islam for decades and the whole history of that part of the world. And he gave a lecture with maps and so forth of the first jihad and the second jihad. The first jihad came out of the Middle East and swept over most of North Africa and took that over. And the second jihad went through Greece and Italy and half of France and all of Spain and so forth until they drove them back. In Spain, these jihadists, every time they would kill a person, they'd cut their head off and they'd throw it in a pile. And there were piles, this is recorded, that were so high of human heads that a man on horseback could not see over it. Just think about that for a minute. Who has what it takes to go along with that kind of stuff? Okay, he estimated that through these two jihads, and this stuff went on for a couple of centuries, I guess, that the Muslims had killed, now think of this, back in the 1800s we had like 3.5 million people in the United States, something like that, and look at it in the 19 and now the 2000s, we're up to 350 million. Back then, in the early part of last millennium, he estimated there were 200 million Christians and Jews killed by the Muslims in the two jihads. 200 million. That would be Horrendous today. Back then it was just multiplied by 100. It'd be like, 200 million be like 2 billion, 20 billion, be more like 20 billion people. Anyway, there are videos that, if they're still on the internet, about the third jihad. You have Muslim, whatever they call themselves, talking about how through infiltration and massive birth rates, they're building up the numbers in these countries, Western Europe and the United States, like they did in Lebanon. Lebanon for a long time was very happy with Druze and Jews and Muslims. But the Muslims kept multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. And Lebanon had become the vacation capital of the Middle East and the banking center of the Middle East. And then the Muslims decided, this is ours, we're taking it over. And they destroyed Lebanon. And it's been a mess ever since. People who feel that they have the right to kill somebody else because of their religion are evil, and so is their religion to the degree that it supports that. And that goes for any religion, whether you call it Christian or whether you call it Jewish or whether you call it Muslim or whatever you want to call it. Some of the finest principles I've ever read of, which I've mentioned here before, were from ancient Egypt. That kingdom lasted 5,000 years, from about 8,500 to 3,500 BC. And they had principles that the goddess Ma'at would state, according to the priest, that became national law. Always speak the truth to everyone was a national law. And if you lied to somebody, you got penalized. Always treat everyone in a kindly manner was a national law. Extreme peace, extreme prosperity, until people who wanted that immigrated in over the centuries and then performed a revolution and took over, destroyed the kingdom. That is principally what we're facing here. They say that so many of the Muslims are peaceful people. Well, when you have these vicious, violent radicals with no limitations at all, how many of those peaceful people are going to stand up against that? Damn few. And that's the same with us too. Most people are gutless.
Yep.
Most people do not have the fiber to stand up for principle and have the backing of their creator in doing it. And I'm one who believes, and I think I know, that if you rely on the backing of your creator, the presence, you can survive things that you would not ordinarily survive. I know numerous stories of that, and you were touching on some of that tonight, and it's just wonderful. Let's see.
Run out of time.
No, I knew it. Where's my stick?
10 minutes. 10 minutes. Double time.
My turn, friend.
I like it when we have competition to be up there.
Yes, I asked the question about capitalism and religion deliberately because when I came in '68, this country had some wonderful companies. I joined Xerox, and it really was a wonderful company. In fact, it started off as Haloid, making black and white films and so on. Along came John Dessart and found this invention called xerography. No one wanted it. They took it around the country, and so they actually mortgaged their houses, okay, the offices, and they started Xerox, okay. And it was believe me, the benefits everyone had were wonderful. And at that time, we had several other wonderful companies, IBM, 3M still going, but Motorola and so on and so forth. I think one of the reasons we had that like that was because the management of these companies grew up in the Depression, okay? They knew what hard times were. They knew how people went through and so on. And so when they became management, they had a feeling for people and they cared about the country. I think the change came in the 80s. I think anybody who was in corporations saw it. And then we had the era of of greed is good. And one of the reasons we had it was I think the people coming into management then grew up after the war, middle class, had never known want. As you say, they had air conditioning, whiz-bang cars and everything else. And basically, they were given stock options that didn't exist before. And of course, from then on, their mantra was layoffs, because that boosted stock prices, which boosted their stock options. The next option was cheap labor. Let's ship stuff off to Mexico. Let's ship it off to China, and the country has gone down and down ever since, okay? And I'm not surprised. In fact, I've been waiting for Joe Sixpack to wake up, and it's taken 30 years, okay? And finally, 8 years ago, they thought Obama would they wanted change, and they got Obama. Well, there was no change from him. And if we get Hillary, we got no change either. Believe me, you won't.
Sixpack wants Trump.
No, I know, because he resonates with what they want. He says he's going to bring back jobs and so on and so forth. And at the other end of the spectrum, that's why Bernie resonates. It's the same thing. Now, I think that these people at the top have just lost any moral values for themselves or the country. And it's this loss of any moral values, any common decency, either about themselves or their employees or the country. This is what we're seeing. And this is why there's been this huge backlash. And I've been waiting for it, and this is what you're seeing. It's not been well articulated, but as an outsider, and I was telling this 30 years ago to my friends. I said, this is what's going to happen. And the net result, and I've said it here many times before, the end result is you'll be selling your country's assets off. Because England is now well along that path. Almost nothing, no infrastructure, many services, water, transport has been sold off, not owned by Britain anymore. And America's going the same way. And these people with no moral values, no love of country, nothing, are doing the self-same thing. And I think this is where morality, comes into play with what we have, this wonderful capitalist system. We've transmogrified it. It's nothing like how it should be and how it should serve the country.
My question a while back on the right and left brain. Every once in a while, over the years, I've listened to this guy named Mark Passio, and he would always bring it up that people that had a right brain that was stronger than their left brain, or their left brain was stronger than their right brain, their mind, that they had a kind of an imbalance. And it could be chemically led along by maybe the fluoride that you drink in your water, or kids nowadays, they're taking Ritalin, which is nothing but methamphetamine with maybe one or two chemicals changed, but they give that to kids. Then you've got your GMOs, your aspartame, and all these poisons that they're putting in our food supply. And I think that has a lot to do with how it impacts our minds. Your hormones get a little out of whack. Maybe you have a mineral deficiency. Could a lot of things could be helping that situation to slide off the edge. But the right brain person that has a stronger right brain is more likely to be a statist and a Democrat. The left brain, the person that's got the stronger left brain, will more likely be a Republican. Reason why, he says, basically the Democrats didn't get enough mommy attention when they were growing up. So now they want the government to be their surrogate mommy and take care of them by giving them everything that they want. And so you have a lot of, and that's the person that has the right brain dominant. They tend to be emotionally immature because of the fact that they always have to insult everybody that offends them. And politically correct talk was developed by them because it's emotional blackmail. But the left brain group, the guys that are the Republicans, they didn't get enough attention from Daddy growing up, and so they want the government to be the real strong military type and go out there and kick everybody's butt. So that's how that balances out. But you're talking about World War II. I think Japan was ready to surrender before they dropped the bomb. That they just didn't want to because they wanted to see what the bomb would do. That's how I kind of look at those issues of the mental imbalance that people have. And it could be, like I said, diet related. It could be all the poisons that are in our food and water and air. It could be the electrosmog. People are acting up over a lot of these issues. And so, if we could somehow get the fluoride out of our water, get all the bad stuff out of our food supply, then maybe people wouldn't be so wacky.
Back in the mid-'80s, I started examining the question of never again. And I had a chance at a New Year's party to meet Alla Danziger, and I tried to get an interview with her and with Sam, one other Holocaust survivor. It was unsuccessful. Neither one of them would give interviews, but I kept looking into the question, and subsequent historical research material becoming available, I became convinced that Auschwitz has really been overrated in the whole scope of things. Auschwitz actually has reduced its numbers of who died there. But what no one talks about is Operation Reinhold. Operation Reinhold is something we all should pay attention to. Watson, the inventor, founder of IBM, was working with the Nazis, and the tattoos on the arms and the databases and so forth, this was all from IBM helping the Nazi regime catalog its citizens, especially its dissidents or not trusted citizens. And Operation Reinhold was a neighborhood roundup program where the Nazis would just take their time. At their leisure, they'd go through and they would identify the Jews, and they would assemble them, and then they'd all take a train ride, and then the train would stop somewhere. Everyone would be left shot in a ditch. And the numbers on Operation Reinhold are really not known. The Nazis kept good records, but some of those records are just not available as to how many people died that way. Now, what was the common theme there? Two of the themes come. Eugenics actually was birthed or brought forth to the world here in the United States, here in America. By who?
Margaret Sanger.
Well, that's later on. But eugenics was something the Nazis adopted from us, you might say. And then also, I worked with IBM execs when I was working for JCPenney Corporate. Some of our corporations that we highly respect had some very dishonorable pasts and the things that they were used for. Now, the reason I'm even bringing this up is, again, back to my position that an individual with integrity is who we should respect and what we should seek. And not normalizing to community, because what I concluded from my mid-'80s research into Never Again, there's nothing that bars us from becoming just like the German people. There's really nothing that keeps us from having pogroms and purges here. They had an incredible mind control program operated upon the populace there in Germany, and where we're all horrified about what happened. But we're really not that immune from it ourselves. It's really the individuals of integrity and becoming individuals of integrity that becomes the stop to us going that direction. And one of the litmus tests and one of the important points is free speech. I have arguments with some of my conservative friends on positions they take, but one of the things my liberal friends do is they want to stop free speech in different areas. If you bring up certain subjects, it's off limits. And this is the political correctness that was referred to here. Political correctness is a bad road to go down. Thank you.
Under free speech people.
You can talk while I'm talking. That'll be free speech. That's your free speech. Okay. A long time ago, somebody came up here and was talking about emotional insecurity. Oh, yeah. Well, I was looking at all your points there, quite redundant, like I'm a 4-year-old. But I'm going to say they're pretty good. What I noticed was I'm very insecure. And, like the 12-step program, I'm here to say I'm very insecure. But what I noticed was that every place that I wasn't insecure, that I seemed like I was pretty strong, my wife was insecure in those parts. So we got a perfect balance there. So those points were like, I'm like this kind of insecure and she's that kind of insecure. So does that make us secure? I don't know. Now this whole thing is summed up in a blues ditty. So be careful with these words here. I was born in a shack, had to build with my own hands, had to raise up all my 10 brothers and sisters. I was the only child, and those hard times. So that's how come I'm like I am. So I'll get around to the politics too. I guess we ought to. The country. Is it insecure? I guess that's part of our relevance here as a nation. Do we have a psyche? We've seen books about the German people's psyche, because that is such a lesson for us. It was an advanced Western country, quite literate, refined in many ways. Home of Wagner, Goethe, Gauss, and it just seemed like what they did was all we can get from it is a lesson. But now the thing is, we differentiate between our government's actions and the people as a people. Is there such a thing as the American people anymore? Now there was a thing called the melting pot, which now is called diversity. So now we're just set off one against the other, and like this color right here is black. It's light brown, but it's black. This color right here, it's red. It's light brown, but it's red. This color right here is light brown, but it's yellow. That's part of the diversity. I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about, but somebody ought to get that. The lightest brown is black. Now, I'm an artist, and if I paint like that, it doesn't come out very, very real, but it comes out real popular, because bizarre crap is popular right now. It's the same thing with the music.
Gotta be rich.
So anyway, what we have now is the internet letting us know all these things. You've heard all these conspiracy theories. Unfortunately, a lot of them are true. Some of them even step on your toes, the old-timers who have a soft spot in their heart for World War II and the Depression and all that. So, some of that there's really some good documentation on the internet that's telling us, that things are different now. So how do we go forward? So, I mean, what we're learning is that the government is people. The government has been put up like a religion. You swear to the flag, I swear to the American flag and this and that. And that got us through World War II, got us through the Depression. But it's not going to work anymore. The one thing you pointed out, or was it somebody else, how corrupt it is at the top. There's a big divide between the common man and the power. The power, the way I look at it, okay, they're best considered first and foremost as just a gang of people that have some unfair advantage. And I don't worship the government at all. And I got reasons for that, but I think that's actually a healthy thing that relates to the birth pangs of this nation. It took us a couple hundred years to become the empire instead of the people fighting the empire. So this is where we are right now. It's kind of mixed up, but I wish I had some answers, but I have to go build another shack.
I get 5 more minutes. There's something that I did years ago. As I mentioned before, I was one of those why daddy kids, and I just had to know what made the clock tick, so I took it apart naturally. Dad didn't like that very much. But I've just always been driven to know the bottom line, the truth, and the more that I have dug down, the more I realize there is no bottom. It keeps going. And one thing I did years ago was make a pact with myself that anything and everything I believed, right to my fundamental religious beliefs, they're on the table for all challenges. And if somebody can come along and prove that one item on that is wrong, I didn't want it in the first place because it was wrong. I don't want to live on beliefs. We all do. This whole thing is a belief system. It's an illusion. I think the movie The Matrix was more accurate than most people will even allow themselves to think. But in doing that, I eventually was the vice president of the local MUFON group, Mutual UFO Network, drawing in speakers from all over and interesting things. We were having a meeting one time at a friend's home, and we were all sitting around in the living room area talking, probably 30 of us. And this one guy, Bryant, and I got into this little discussion where it was kind of back and forth of testing each other's position on a theological matter. And I'm one who, if I am 90% convinced on one thing, but I've got a little bit in there that I'm not sure of, I will take exactly the opposite position to try to draw out of that person that little last bit, if possible. And so we were having this discussion, and he and I were enjoying it a lot, and everybody pretty soon just stopped their talking and they were glued into our conversation. And after a while, his wife just burst out at me and started yelling, said, how can you question my husband? He has a theological degree from this XYZ place and so forth and on and on. We were all in a state of shock. And she stopped and everybody kind of chuckled and got up and went and got some hors d'oeuvres and so forth. And I went over to a friend and I said, Rick, what in the hell did I say to tick her off like that? And he laughed and he said, oh, Albert, that's easy. You're a destroyer. And I said, what do you mean? That doesn't sound very good. He says, no, actually, that's a compliment. He said, I've been watching you for years, and you are so intent on getting to the truth, the bottom of the matter, that you end up destroying other people's myths, and it makes them uncomfortable. Now, I'm going to suggest something, that everybody here start thinking about, what are they? What is thinking? Are you your thinking? If you can control your thinking, then no, you're not. You're something else, and your thinking is a tool. What are your emotions? Can you control them? Most people don't seem to be able to. They're a powerful thing. And as I've said before, every degree of emotion necessarily alters your perception of reality, period. I consider that to be a well-established fact. You cannot reach truth by thinking only. You cannot reach truth by emotions at all. And it's very important, particularly when it's a challenging situation, to have practiced and be able to move those emotions aside and think very clearly and logically to make it through that situation. I'll give you one example. A friend of mine was a pilot in the Air Force and then later as a commercial pilot. And he was bringing in this commercial airplane at night over a city on the final approach, and both engines quit like that over buildings. Well, what would most people do? They'd probably panic because they know they're going to die in a minute. He immediately turned to the presence of God and got all of that emotion and all of that thinking out of the way, so it was total listening. And he heard a voice that to him was oral that said, retract the landing gear. Now, if you're going to have a crash landing in an airplane, this is absolutely the opposite of your training, because that landing gear hanging down there being crunched up by the force will absorb part of the destructive energy and lessen the amount of energy that goes to the airplane and to you. So that was, but he immediately pulled the landing gear up like that. That allowed the airplane to just skim the wall on the top of a building. Had the gear been down, they would have hooked on that wall, pulled the nose down, they'd have gone straight down in the street and all been killed. But it skimmed over the top and went across the street and into the second floor of an apartment building. Burst into flames, fell through to the first floor. All of the passengers on the airplane got out alive. One man had a broken back. He recovered okay from it. Nobody else was injured. The woman who had been evicted from the lower apartment had all her stuff still in the apartment, and the insurance put her back on her feet. The man who owned the apartment building was being foreclosed upon, and the insurance put him back on his feet. The corporation got a better airplane with the insurance than the one that they lost, and the man who would have been in that upper bedroom of that apartment was down the street picking up something for his wife that she'd asked him to go get, and he learned to always obey his wife. And that whole company began to have meetings after that and discuss what he had to say about that whole experience. And it made all of them spend much more quality time with their families and begin to go to church more and so forth. You have to learn to get the emotions out of the way. Do not reason by emotion. Do not argue by emotion. Only do it with logic and clear thinking.
I guess I'm the last one standing. I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. He got everybody thinking. Some of the, now I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, some of the things that were brought up here tonight, it seems like whenever the economy goes bad, there's always a rise of a lunatic fringe, if you noticed. Someone brought up Germany years ago. If you remember, they came out after the the fall of the Depression. Their whole country was in shambles. And then the lunatic fringe rose up. Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany, and we know the rest. Well, this country, we have some of the same problems right now. We have an economy that's gone bad. We have, as John mentioned, England's in bad shape. We're becoming in bad shape. Our corporations have left town. They're gone overseas. And the end result is we lost a lot of jobs. We lost a lot of everything. And people are upset. And that's why they're going for people like Mr. Trump, another. And I personally think he'd be the wrong person to have in charge of anything, but that's neither here nor there.
And Bernie's got good support too.
Well, Bernie might make it. You never know.
Reason.
Well, for a similar reason. If and the problem is if it ends up being Hillary, what's going to happen to Bernie's people? They might go to Trump. You don't know. That's one of the problems. Someone mentioned about mobs and herds. Herds. One thing about a herd, it doesn't have a leader. So we're not a mob. We're a herd. A mob has a leader. So that's something to remember. And it was brought up here about mom and pop operations being squandered because of big corporations. Well, Something to remember, in 1938, they shortened the workday in this country from 10 hours to 8 hours. And it was the Fair Labor Standards Act. It only affected big business, big corporations. They screamed like stuck pigs, but they had options: break up, demerge, form smaller companies, get around the restrictive labor law, or spend money, become more productive, and produce more in less time than competition small business did in more time. Within 5 years, big business and labor went hand in hand to each state legislature to put the small business people on a shorter workday, because misery loved company want to eliminate their competition. That's how we got the 8-hour day and the 5-day work week in this country. That's how it went to other countries, and from what we started. I think that is something we have to look at ahead of time, down the road. But we can't have, that won't happen here under the present circumstance, because we have the best Congress money can buy. That's our biggest problem, in my view. And that's what has to change. If that doesn't change, we're not going to change. And we got money running the Congress. We got corporations controlling the Congress. We got corporations that are bigger than countries. We got corporations ruling the roost. They're making money, and everybody working for them isn't. People are hurting, and this is not a good thing. So what will change all this? In my view, we got to get Congress. We get the best Congress money can buy. We got to change that. And what will they vote for? What will they? Whatever happens, they have to do it. What are they going to vote for? In my view, they might vote for free airtime the last 90 days of a general election, and keep the money they raised in the meantime. They would go for that, because they could be embarrassed and cajoled into it, and they would vote it in. And what would happen is that some challenges would beat some incumbents, and when that happened, everything would change. Congressmen would end up representing the people who did the electing instead of representing the people that buy their vote in Washington. If that happened, then you could put tariffs on corporations overseas, and they could produce things here. You could have jobs here, and then you might even think about shortening the workday, maybe a 6-hour day instead of an 8-hour day. And you'd have 25 million people put back to work, and that are now unemployed or underemployed. Well, anyway, that's a future that we can have if we work at it. So thank you. You're up.
Tom, they got around that 10-hour day eventually.
Yeah.
You know why I know? I worked at Ford Motor Company assembly plant here in Dallas. Went to work there in '63. They had gone from 2 shifts to 1. So as a result, they had more hours per week. We worked 10 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and 8 hours on Saturday. But we got time and a half overtime for 18 hours a week. That's the way they paid them for it, but they still got the 10-hour days. So, and the Ford people were pretty good. And in fact, when they shut that plant down in '69, there were a lot of guys in tears, crying. And I was going to mention your comment about Xerox. I can appreciate the contribution of Xerox, because when I was at Ford, we had what they called an OSLID machine, poor copies. They were involved ammonia. And when you walk by the reproduction room, whoo, boy, you better move fast. You get drunk, almost, you know, it was a strong smell, yeah. But at any rate, gosh, I appreciated the opportunity tonight, and thank you very much. And I've enjoyed all the other comments, a lot of insightful stuff here, and what Tom said about Congress. Well, the entire Congress, and it's been this way for too many years, has a, what is it, a approval rate of about 12%?
7%. Yep.
7? It's down to 7 now.
Down to 7.
Oh, well, you know, I wouldn't want to be the one who's trying to argue against you, you know, but that's exactly right. But hey, folks, love you, appreciate your attention, appreciate all your comments, and wish you the best.
Okay, that's it for tonight. Our speaker will be here with us. You can talk to him, and They kick us out of here at 10:30, just so you know. And but you can stick around if you want. That's it. Thank you. See you next week. Here,
Thank you.